It's a hard psalm to listen to, but today I want to talk about a fire that consumes. A fire that consumes. Even though this psalm is hard to hear, it's a well-known song that is very moving. Perhaps you know the song that came from this. By the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down, and there we wept when we remembered Zion. It's been made by multiple artists. Multiple people have sung it. Many people have used it as a lament song. Because it's even more moving, not only when we sing it, but when we remember the context of which it arises. The Judeans had been forcibly removed from their homeland into Babylon. Their city had been burned. The people had been starved, murdered, and brutalized. And their temple, the place where God lived, had been leveled. The trail of tears from the city of God to the shores of Babylon were covered in tears, terror, and trauma. And now their captors, their terrorizers, are commanding them to play their instruments and sing the sacred songs of their homeland. This is something they just can't do. The psalmist writes, "How could we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land?" And this command surfaces a sorrowful remembrance of the city of Jerusalem. "If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. Let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy." Even 3,000 years later, you can feel their grief and their sense of sorrow through this psalm. It's palpable and it's understandable. But here's the thing. Verse 6 is usually where our readings stop. Verses 7 through 9 have been historically omitted from the lectionary reading of Psalm 137. Many churches just skip the psalm entirely. Even the song, the music that we've heard so many times, stop at verse 6. The ending of this psalm is hard to hear. It's hard to read. It's a lament psalm, but it's different than the other lament psalms. There is no move at the end sharing their trust in God's righteousness. There is no praise of the work that God is going to do. There's something else. And I want us to read it, and I want us to pay attention to it this morning because I believe it teaches us an important lesson. So let's hear those words again. "Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem's fall. How they said, tear it down, down to its foundations. O daughter Babylon, you devastator, happy shall they be who pay you back what you have done to us. Happy shall they be who take your little ones and dash them against a rock." Let's take a moment. Let's let those words sink in a minute. In a flash, between verses 6 and verses 7, the Judeans move from a spirit of remembrance to a spirit of revenge. And it's hard for us to hear. The thing is, often the things that are the most difficult for us to hear, the most difficult for us to experience, often those things are our greatest teachers. So I invite us to let this psalm teach us this morning because I believe that we are living in a very scary moment right now. Not just because of Russia flying militarized zones over NATO countries, not just because of the destruction, massacre, and starvation in Gaza, not just because of the vicious civil war in Nepal, but because here in the United States, we are living in a very scary moment that far too many of our leaders and way too many of our citizens are experiencing. I believe when I see the world around us that we are swimming in a spirit of revenge. Some for revenge over many different things, some that we can understand, some that we cannot, some that are real, some that are perceived, some that have long decades of history, and some that might have just happened recently. But for whatever reason, whether it's justified or not, no matter what side of a spectrum you are on, I feel there is a spirit of revenge that is alive and is moving in our country right now. Not only is it scary to me, but it's dangerous. The spirit of revenge that I sense emerges out of a rage that has people and communities that have led people and communities to do horrible things throughout history. It is a fire that consumes. It burns us up from the inside out. And this psalm shows us why this is so dangerous. First, I want you to look at how the psalm builds. It quickly becomes all-consuming. Look how in just a few verses it goes from remember to pay you back to dashing babies' heads against a rock. Like a fire fed with dry leaves and wind, the spirit of revenge eats us up quickly and thoroughly. But in that, we also see the second reason that it's so dangerous. It is also dehumanizing. We lose our own humanity because the rage that we feel burns everything else in our lives up. We lose access to our empathy through revenge. In revenge, we lose our compassion, our desires. We lose our love. It becomes all-consuming, and all we can think about is seeking revenge, is getting the revenge that we so desperately want. And in turn, we dehumanize others. The subject of our rage becomes a target, and anything human in them is lost. There's a very real possibility that the Judeans don't even know what they are saying by the end of this psalm. They don't see babies, they just see enemies. They don't see enemies, they just see red. Anytime anything is dehumanized, nothing ever turns out for good. And so the third thing that we see in the psalm is the Judeans embracing a bad theology. When we are in revenge mode, our once loving God becomes a vengeful God, defending whatever steps we have to take to get our revenge. We theologize. If we're a spiritual person, we theologize what we're experiencing. And we see that over and over in history. It's uncomfortable, but I remember seeing American troops painting crosses and Bible verses on rockets and bombs that were being dropped in Iraq and Afghanistan after 9/11. We were a traumatized nation, and in many circles, our actions of revenge were spiritualized. We see it in smaller ways around lifestyles that we don't agree with or are comfortable with. We quote scripture out of context to defend our discomfort. The spirit of revenge is dangerous. It's a fire that sparks quickly, and once it is lit, it consumes everything around us just as quickly. I don't know about you, but I feel the spirit of revenge alive in our country right now. And it's a dangerous moment. And while none of us have the power to change the nation, not one individual, none of us here today have the power to change this whole country. We do have the power to check ourselves and our immediate community. And not only do we have that power, but I believe we have that obligation. So I want us to think about the spirit of revenge within ourselves. It could be for any reason. Maybe we've experienced in the past, maybe it's not now, but I want us to think about the spirit of revenge that we experience in our own selves. To confront what we see as righteous revenge takes a spiritual maturity to transform. It takes great self-knowledge and great self-awareness. It requires humility and it requires faith. You see, the spirit of revenge emerges out of anger and of rage. And anger and rage spring out of sorrow and grief. By the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down, and there we wept. Oftentimes, we don't handle sorrow and grief well, especially in our culture. I know I was taught, not necessarily by my parents, but by the culture that I grew up in, that I needed to swallow my sadness, or at least don't show it. No one wants to be around anyone who's sad all the time. It was also gendered. You might feel sad as a boy growing up. You might be grieving, but somehow tears are effeminate. As a man, don't let people see you cry. Real men don't cry. This is dangerous. This is not right. In his new book, The Tears of Things, Father Richard Rohr talks about this very issue. He writes about how the prophets are examples of using rage for their good, of using rage for the good of the world. He says they all experience rage, but that this rage arises out of sorrow and grief. However, that rage is transformed because they allow their sorrow and their grief to be their teacher. When their rage swells within them, he says they knew and taught that at first must be recognized, allowed, even loved, as an expression of the deep, normally inaccessible sadness that we all carry. We are uncomfortable with sorrow, with how it makes us feel. We allow our anger to lead us. We skip over that anger. We feel that sadness, we feel that sorrow, and we swallow it, and we allow anger to cover over it. And we allow that to build into rage. But we must lean in this grief and this sorrow. What it teaches us is that through our tears of sorrow, something exactly opposite of the spirit of revenge emerges. Rohr writes that grief and sadness are doorways to understanding life in a non-egocentric way. Tears come from both awe and empathy. And they generate even deeper awe and deeper empathy in us. The sympathy that wells up when we weep can be life-changing too, drawing us out of ourselves and into communion with those around us. Learning from our grief and learning from our sadness not only transforms us, it transforms those who come around us, who we engage with. It creates a communion. A different fire, rather than consuming us, a fire that feeds us. See, Jesus knew this. He even modeled it for us. We forget that in our Gospels, we see Jesus cry 3 times. We see Jesus cry after the death of Lazarus. We see Jesus cry over the city of Jerusalem. And we see Jesus cry in Gethsemane before his arrest and crucifixion. Jesus had and Jesus felt sorrow and grief. And we were able to witness it through the gospel accounts. But rather than avoid it, rather than allowing a spirit of rage to go into revenge and to take over Jesus' very spirit and very being, he knew that his tears would teach, that our sorrow would heal, and that our grief would make whole. Jesus modeled for us how to allow our grief to be a teacher. And because he leaned into that sorrow and leaned into that grief, we saw a healing, we saw a teaching, and we saw a resurrection. This is a dangerous moment in our world. And rather than feed into the spirit of revenge that is all around us, I invite us to collectively sit by our own rivers of Babylon, connect with the grief and the sorrow that lies underneath, and allow it to teach us, and allow it to transform us into a greater communion of awe and of empathy. We can't change the whole world in which we live, but we can change ourselves, and we can change the communities, the immediate communities in which we are a part of. And I invite us to sit in our sorrow and our grief and allow it to teach us as we move forward. Amen.